I invite Munish Gupta, Secretary FCC, to launch the proceeding. Munish.
Thank you everybody, and welcome to this webinar. Once again, we've had a series of very phenomenal and successful webinars from the Foreign Correspondents Club of South Asia. My name is Munish Gupta. I happen to be the secretary of the club, and I would like to welcome all our friends and associates who are here to talk about the book. And with just a note to Professor Kondapalli, Professor, I know that you probably have a lot of authors and your associates here who have a bunch of very good knowledge, and I was listening to some of them. But they'll have to keep their comments very brief and short if we want people's interaction, because after a while, 30 minutes of talking and then we can keep 30, 40 minutes of interaction. I would really appreciate that. But before that, I would like to welcome and bring on board our president of the FCC South Asia, Mr. S. Venkat Narayan, to formally welcome our guests and speakers, and then proceed with the remarks. Venkat.
Thank you, Manish. Good afternoon, friends. Professor Shrikant Kondapalli and Dr. Chaheli Das, who got her doctorate just now. I want to congratulate her on this occasion, and also Tilak Jha and the galaxy of scholars whom we can see on our screens, who have contributed very valuable chapters to this very important book on China and COVID. This is the book they have come up with. It's a fat volume, cost 2,000 rupees, brought out by Pentagon Press and being distributed by Amazon. So those of you watching this live or who will watch it on YouTube and website later can order their copies of the book. We are delighted to have this very important discussion on China and COVID-19. COVID-19, according to various reports, started in Wuhan. People in India connect Wuhan with President Xi Jinping's historic informal summit meeting with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. But Wuhan has been the capital of China at least twice during more than 150 years in the past. And Wuhan is also famous because that's where Mao Zedong started his famous 15-kilometer swim across the great Yangtze River. But the bottom line right now is that the world knows Wuhan as the place where COVID-19 started. And COVID-19 clearly is one of the most serious pandemics to have hit the world. During the past 100 years since the Spanish flu. I'm not counting World War I and World War II, but every second person on the planet has had to undergo some kind of lockdown, according to Professor Kondapalli's introduction to the book. And so it is, let me just say this, according to the book, COVID originating in Wuhan in China and spreading to the rest of the country and the world is a defining moment in the current human history. By mid-July, it affected over 13 million, but as of now, it has crossed 20 million and consummated over 500,000 lives, which is now 700,000, disrupted the socio-economic fabric of many countries and began mutating into a second or third phase. China has been at the center of this process, although now other countries have taken its place in this tragic, contagious epic. This volume, written by China experts, is the first comprehensive interdisciplinary and area studies evaluation of China's domestic and external dimensions of handling the COVID-19. COVID-19, in all likelihood, will go down in human history as one of the most decisive events in terms of its global scale the unprecedented fear that it generated across vast swaths of the world, the kind of economic destruction that it inflicted across the board, barring a few sectors such as pharmaceuticals and environment, and for the comprehensive dislocation it brought about, including in the regional and global orders. An estimated 3 billion people, that's practically every second human being on the planet, has been affected by this terrible pandemic. The 18 scholars whom you see on our screen, they have been raised at the China program at the famous Jawaharlal Nehru University of Delhi. They broach the subject of domestic and external dimensions of China and COVID-19 and offer in-depth analysis of the spread of the contagion by utilizing extensively Chinese language and other sources. And all of them are very prolific in speaking and writing Chinese language. May I introduce the editors of the book, Professor Shrikant Kondapalli. He is a professor in Chinese studies at the Jawaharlal Nehru University. He was chairman of the Center for East Asian Studies, School of International Studies, JMU from 2008 to 10, 12 to 14, 16 to 18, and 18 to 20. He is educated in Chinese studies in India and China with a PhD in Chinese studies. He learned Chinese language at Beijing Language and Culture University and was a postdoctoral visiting fellow at People's University, Beijing from 1996-98. He was a visiting professor at National Chengchi University, Taipei in 2004, a visiting fellow at China Institute of Contemporary International Relations, Beijing in May 2007, an honorary professor at Shandong University, Jinan in 2009, just to quote a few of his various accomplishments. He has published several books and is a familiar face on television channels and newspaper columnist. Anything big that happens in China, people approach him, including foreign journalists. We are delighted to have you with us, Professor Kondapalli. May I now introduce Shaheli Das. She's as I said, she just got her PhD today. She's a Strategic Sector Cooperation Program Officer at the Royal Danish Embassy in New Delhi. She has worked as a researcher at premier think tanks in India, such as Center for Air Power Studies and Observer Research Foundation. She is also a visiting fellow to Fudan Development Institute in Shanghai. She has also been a recipient of the prestigious Chinese Government Scholarship 2017 and 18. She has presented papers at various national and international conferences. She also has a substantial, biodata. So then, may I introduce Dr. Tilak Jha. He is currently working as an assistant professor at Times School of Media, Bennett University. He teaches journalism and offers an open elective on China to engineering, management, and law graduates. He last worked as a China specialist with the BBC, where he covered the country's annual parliament session and the Sino-US trade war, among others. Dr. Jha was also a Bai Qian Scholar on Asian Future Leaders Scholarship between 2014 and 16 at China's Zhejiang University, Hangzhou. Dr. Tilak has nearly a dozen book chapters in edited volumes on China by reputed publishers and is a regular contributor to media and policy forums, both at the national and international level. For shortage of time, I'm in no position to introduce the rest of the galaxy of scholars on China who have contributed articles, long chapters to this book. So without wasting any more time, may I request Professor Shrikant Kondapalli to tell us all about the book, how he came to write about it, and what are the main highlights of the book. He will speak for 15 minutes. Thank you, Professor.
Sir, you're on mute. We can't hear you.
No.
Thank you very much, Mr. Venkat Narayan. A good evening to you all. Let me also thank Mr. Munish Gupta, the secretary, as well as the publisher, Mr. Rajan Arya, for getting the volume out in a substantial manner. Let me also thank the contributors to the volume and my co-editor, Dr. Shaheli Das, for having all the arrangements, the FCC, the Foreign Correspondents Club of South Asia as well. Let me also thank Dr. Tilakja for making some of these arrangements. A very good evening to you all. Namaskar. Now, the book that we have in our hand, this is we.
नहीं यार, वहाँ हाँ, पूरा दिखना चाहिए ना, पूरा face.
Sir, you have got muted.
Okay, I unmuted you. Don't worry, go ahead. Sorry.
Thank you. For the past 6 months or so, we have been monitoring the COVID-19 on a daily basis with various databases that are coming up in Johns Hopkins University, the World Health Organization statistics, various media houses that have been very active in looking at this major event in our current human history. As the president mentioned, nearly 3 billion people are affected across the globe, including in India now, nearly 2 lakh infections. Of course, the cases that are being treated are also pretty high. Nevertheless, this is a major event in our human history right now. We began with China as the domestic, and the 18 contributors are raised in the China program at Jawaharlal Nehru University. So we looked at mainly the China portion, what are the motivations that China has. Secondly, we also looked at the external dimensions. For instance, 10 contributors looked at the external dimension with various countries. The focus has been what has been the nature of the COVID-19 infections, both in China and abroad. What did the government do in terms of coping up with the COVID-19 infections? What did China do if it is related to other countries in terms of international assistance or any other help that they have been able to provide? Because after February 26th Politburo Standing Committee meeting, China made it a point to make this as a part of the international cooperation. Secondly, we looked at the responses of these countries in addressing the COVID-19. So to start with the domestic aspects, we have 8 contributors who looked at the origins, the controversy related to the name and the numbers. As you all know, China has over 80,000 infections as compared to roughly 2 lakh in India, or the highest in the US so far, nearly in millions, all of these infections, which suggests basically then how did China cope up with the COVID-19 and how other countries have responded in terms of these infections. Now, at the domestic level, we looked at the domestic debates in China. Jigme Yeshe Lama looked at the politics, the governance or lack of it in some cases, especially before January 23rd, when Wuhan has been clamped. But between January 11th to January 23rd, nearly 5 million people have gone away from Wuhan into the rest of the world, creating what we have now seen as the contagion across the globe. Jigme Yeshe Lama's focus was on the politics and the leadership, the debates especially the internal criticism that has come up with Professor Xu Changrun or Ren Chiang, the real estate tycoon who were kept under detention. We have also had the chapter written by Dr. Priyanka Pandit on the economic aspects. This is a major issue that has affected every other country. China also began with the debates on safety or prosperity related. So she brought out in her chapter about the economic aspects, how production has to be restored despite the COVID-19 related cases. So that was her focus. We have also had Dr. Tilak Jha, whose focus was on the media coverage. As you all know, during the SARS crisis in 2002 to 2003, China had clamped down on information sharing. And this resulted in over 800 infections across the country and also across the globe. Information is very important, and this is where he looks at the three media houses and the difference between a privately owned Caixin media house compared to the mouthpieces of People's Daily and the Xinhua News Agency. We have also had the focus on for instance, the myth, as Dr. Rajasimhan mentions in his chapter on the bioweapons or a lack of it in the case of Wuhan Institute of Virology. Then we have also had the chapter written by Dr. M.S. Pratibha on the military aspects. Here she focuses, unlike in India, unlike in the rest of the world, China immediately resorted to the use of military in addressing the COVID-19. Mostly, of course, non-combat forces and also high-tech items which were utilized in written by Munish Sharma. These two chapters are important in how the COVID tackled with the armed forces and high-tech weapons. We have also had an interesting contribution by Supriya Sharma, who looks at the sports-related aspects, because one of the major casualties, of course, after health and economy is the physical stature as well as the exercises by the humanity across the globe. Many stadia have been shut down, while some stadia have been utilized for open theaters, open hospital theaters and others. That is also a novel idea which was suggested in India. So Supriya Sharma's article looks at the impact on sports. So these 8 chapters are focused on the domestic aspects, while 10 other contributors chapters have focused on the external dimension. So to start with, we have the contribution by Ms. Sana Hashmi on Taiwan. Taiwan is a unique case where you have only a double-digit number of casualties so far, and overall less than 500 cases of infections. And due to the aggressive contact tracing, as well as public health management and the triggers given to the local communities, Taiwan suggests to a completely different model of addressing the COVID-19, a democratic way, and the local communities utilizing their efforts in addressing the COVID-19. We have also the contributions by Ms. Rukmini Gupta, who focused on one of the most important aspects, that is the China-US investigated the virus as Chinese virus, and his Secretary of State, Mr. Pompeo, mentioned about the Wuhan virus. From the beginning, this has become highly politicized in the United States. So Ms. Gupta looks at the China-US equations in relation to the COVID-19. This is a very important chapter. I would request the audience to carefully look at these contributions. Also, we have had Ms. Sakshi Anand looking at Russia. Russia today is 5th largest in terms of infections. Although in the beginning they were able to shut down. In fact, Russia was the first country to have shut its borders with China, despite the WHO rulings or despite the liking of the Chinese government. They have been able to shut down the borders. Yet today, Russia is one of the largest in terms of infections. So Sakshi Anand's chapter looks at the Sino-Russian relations, especially given the fact that Russia has become much closer to China in the Belt and Road Initiative projects and other energy cooperation or military transfers. So this chapter looks at the friction points generated by the COVID-19 between China and Russia. The next chapter is by European relations. Europe has been one of the major victims of COVID-19 in Italy, Spain, and the rest of Europe, in UK, in Germany, in France, or we have also seen the Swedish model of no restrictions put up, no restrictions put up on the free movement of the people. So that kind of a model has also been addressed in this chapter, and the European responses, which is very important for us to understand the COVID-19 dynamics. We have also had the chapter written by Dr. Amrita Jash on China-Japan relations. One of the major casualties of COVID-19 is the postponement of the Olympics to be held in Japan. And Japan is substantially dependent on the economic and other aspects. So the expected visit of President Xi Jinping to Japan has also been postponed due to the COVID-19. So this has been a major change in the China-Japan relations. Dr. Jash looked at this chapter more intensely in terms of the infections and how the democratic model also has certain limitations in terms of addressing the COVID-19. Although in the beginning it has been successful, but with the cruise ship which had carried the infections to Japan, and also the open borders that Japan has in terms of the tourist inflow, this has been a major limitation in the Japanese response to the COVID-19. We also had Dr. Shuparna Pathak, who looked at the 8 South Asian countries' responses in COVID-19, addressing the COVID-19 related. So, like with the other chapters, when did COVID-19 enter these countries? What is the response of these countries? What has been China's assistance, if any, in tackling COVID-19, and also the local government's responses? This is also an important chapter because, as you all know, the Indian government took the initiative to organize the online SARC meeting, South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation of the medical establishments, and subsequently Indian government launched substantial cooperation by the paracetamol or other related drugs exports, as well as PPEs and other medical equipment. So South Asian responses to the COVID-19 has been the major theme. Dr. Ambuj Thakur focused on the China-Southeast Asia relations. As you all know, on January 18th, the first victim outside China was reported in Thailand, who came from Wuhan, and he passed away on January 18th. Because of this incident, the WHO swung into action, and then subsequently we have had the cases reported more professionally by the WHO. the Associated Press had an investigative journalism into the WHO related discussions on what went wrong in reporting the human-to-human transmissions in China, especially before January 23rd clampdown. So the Thailand case in Southeast Asia has been an eye-opener, and Southeast Asian responses have been documented in this chapter here, and also the Chinese government response, which is crucial because of the Belt and Road Initiative or other programs. Mritika Guha Sarkar, her focus was on China-Australia relations. As you know, that Australia took the lead in the WHA meeting in terms of the independent comprehensive investigation into the origins of COVID-19. Of course, Australia has been penalized with the Chinese ban on imports from Australia or other costs that have been imposed. So Ms. Sarkar looks at the Sino-Australian relations in context of COVID-19. Australia is also not a worst affected country in terms of COVID-19, also offers a different model compared to that of the Chinese model on the COVID-19. So please have a look at this. The last two chapters take us to Latin America and Africa. Latin America today is again in the forefront of COVID-19, although Africa has been reported very less number of cases, fortunately. Brazil has been in the forefront in the infections rate and the kind of destruction that has been caused. So Dr. Shaheli Das' contribution is in looking at these 20-odd countries' responses on the COVID-19. Africa, again, with over 55 countries in the continent, their responses are important, given the background of the public health related aspects within Africa, and also its role in the WHA or other major multilateral institutions. So Dr. Abhishek Kumar Darby, his focus was on China-Africa relations, and he looks at the context and the needs of China and the response in the WHA and before by President Xi Jinping in addressing the COVID-19 related. So my request is that please have a look at this volume and have a good reading. Thank you for your attention.
May I now, in the interest of time, just roll on to the next speaker. Is Dr. Shaheli Das going to speak? And is Dr. Tilak Jha also going to speak, or are we going to just start the interaction? Professor? Do you want
Dr. Shaheli Das?
Yeah. Dr. Das, can you unmute yourself? You want me to unmute you? Hang on. Okay,
thank you very much. Sorry, I was unable to unmute from my end. Thank you very much, Mr. Venkat Narayan, Mr. Munish Gupta, Professor Shrikant Kondapalli, FCC. Good evening, everyone. Hope you all are safe amidst the COVID-19 pandemic, and thank you all for joining in today's event. Professor Kondapalli has almost mentioned everything, but to bring our book in perspective and to keep my comment very, very short and crisp, I would like to once again reiterate that COVID-19 is truly one of the worst hit crisis that has affected human history. And its severity can clearly be deciphered from its expansion, from the scope of its expansion, as well as the death toll caused by it across the globe. In its trail are millions of patients across the globe, hundreds of thousands of deaths, turmoil and dislocations all around. Now, as the World Health Organization has shown through its estimates as of mid-July 2020, that there were more than 13 million infections of COVID-19 and over 500,000 deaths in 216 countries. It can clearly be understood that the pandemic has disrupted on a very large scale sectors such as travel, transportation networks, economics, and political systems. Now, every pandemic has a few consequences. First being, it weakens the public confidence in a government's ability to respond. Second, it distorts the productive economic growth. It destroys the underlying fabric that holds a given polity together, promotes regional tension and mistrust, strategically challenges the status quo of regional and international systems through the specter of biowarfare and bioterrorism. So incidentally, COVID-19 has evoked all of these at the domestic as well as the international level. And since COVID-19 began in China and exhibited a veritable response in the domestic and foreign policy dimensions, therefore this book is likewise divided into two main sections, first being the domestic society, polity, economy, etc., and others, and the external aspects explore the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic across the globe. So since the area of study of this volume is so huge, it cannot be merely said that this is just a book for area studies. It is also very, very important for international relations in general. All the contributors of this volume have tried to address the following questions. How did the COVID-19 originate, and what are the debates and discussions? What is its impact, and how have bilateral relations been affected by it? All 18 contributors of this volume are here in this platform today, including Professor Kondapalli, Dr. Tilak Jha, and me. And we would be extremely happy to answer your questions regarding our book. Thank you.
Okay, now may I ask Dr. Tilak Jha to make brief comments, please? Hang on, let me unmute you.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Saibalda, Venkatnarayan sir, and my friends and colleagues. I think the chapter, as far as it's concerned, is fairly, I think it's pretty much obvious to all the China observers in general that, well, as far as the official media is concerned, they have one way of covering it, that's normally in line with the official propaganda. And I think normally what people tend to ignore is the exceptions, and that's where Caixin, one of the very few, possibly the only one privately owned and possibly basically focusing upon business, but at the same time, giving some very important political and socio-economic coverage at the same time. And I think Caixin's coverage has been crucial at different points of time, including in 2003. It was Caixin then, by the way. Caixin, and after that, Hu Xijin, who basically was in Caixin then, later on started Caixin, and its coverage, well, compared to what it did in, what Hu did in earlier in 2003, it was very different under Xi's China, but still, I think it did a substantially good job compared to the way we see journalism to work. So that's for one. But I think going beyond these theatrical and these general points, I think one thing that we have to concede for sure is that there has been successes the way China sees it. And if you see the domestic and in the domestically, the way Chinese media covered it, I think in today's China, for that matter, fairly a substantial number of Chinese, and I think this is something which has been proven by recent public opinion surveys as well, that the support for the party has risen, is that actually the Chinese media's coverage worked in its favor in boosting the support for the party and the leadership. So on the domestic front, we cannot say that, well, however we see media, that's the way we see it. We see it from outside, but as far as the Chinese people are concerned, I think the Chinese state has done a fairly good job in controlling the virus, the number of casualties as well. I think whatever, and there is enough evidence to suggest that possibly there's a lot of cover-up. There is absolutely almost no doubt about it. That's something which my chapter deals in detail. I would request you to get in to take a look at it if you, if you want to get into it further. But I think generally the Chinese people believe that. So that's definitely, so domestically the Chinese media's coverage has fairly worked. And I think what they have also worked is that the local leaders were basically blamed, the top leadership remains free, the use of technology has been substantial, political messaging has been very, very phenomenal, beginning from the 25th January speech of Xi Jinping, where, among others, he said that, well, saving lives is of paramount importance, Shan Ming Chung Yu Tai Shan. And So you see, there are successes for sure. And there are successes also in terms of controlling citizen journalism. A couple of case studies that I have done in my chapter about Li Zuohua, about Chen Xiushi, about Fang Bin, and of course Fang, which has become pretty famous because her book got international attention. But at the same time, in China, she was fairly trolled by the netizens. So you see domestic successes, but going beyond that, outside world, China's propaganda we see hasn't really worked much. So Xi's successes on the domestic front has effectively been severely criticized by the outside foreign observers. The United States domestically, the US may have been termed to be sort of hostile, but you see US and Trump's branding of calling it China virus, something, by the way, which is again another success, by the way, that hardly anybody calls it, at least in the international politicians or for that matter newspapers, so hardly call it China virus. So that's also domestically, and internationally there are some successes as well. But broadly there has been failures. So you see UK has taken off Huawei, and it's not just because of virus, but at the same time we see this domino effect coming together. So so the sentiments which have worked in the domestic context of China, they seem to have backfired. I think this is general failure of the Chinese media once they get out of the border. So, for example, if you see the case of Latin America even, or the Africa, where Chinese media is relatively considered to be effective, but at the same time, if you compare, for example, in Brazil, the number of followers of Xinhua's Spanish version is hardly around 6-7 lakhs compared to CNN's version, which is around 18 million. So there is a substantial difference, and that's something which is not just true in China, so-called markets where they're effective. That's definitely very, very negative in other markets. So I think coming back to, I would like others to also pull in their views, but I think one thing that we need to see is that well, there have been some issues, and then I think, as I said, official media does in general, very, very positive coverage of the state, but at the same time, there are clues at times which tells you things about the way the Chinese state is working, with the way there are factional differences. For example, in 16th February edition of Party General Xiushi, they revealed that she had acknowledged public discontent. Now, that's something which is pretty much different. I mean, that's something not normal in China's case, though in general, Xi himself has been at the core of Chinese media narrative. One thing that's also important to note is that on 26th of January, state media unveiled, and that's something which is, again, something that's not normally happening, is that policy-making and coordination body at the top echelon of the CCP, central leading a small group, for example, to counter the new governance, new coronavirus infection pneumonia epidemic. She was not in charge. It was Li who was in charge. There were so many reports which have started coming up over the period that how possibly it was because of Xi's trying to save his image, and at the same time also trying to portray that, well, if there is a blame which comes from the people towards the leadership, it should go to Li Keqiang and Sun Chunlan rather than the president himself. So that's possibly one of the reasons. I think, so you see, there are different interesting ways of looking and studying Chinese media. And I think one important thing which I'd like to conclude, that today, this morning, if you see the newspapers, the Nikkei Asian Review, they have posted something like, well, Pei Tai He meeting, which happened every August. This is basically almost going, and this secretive meeting is basically non-existent sort of thing. There is hardly any news coming about that. That happened to be one political meeting where the party elders would basically question the current leadership in general. But that's something which is, again, something is happening. We'll get to know about these, not necessarily from the Chinese media, but possibly from Japanese media, from Kyoto, from Nikkei. Maybe at some point of time, some meeting will tell you that, well, this thing hasn't happened. So possibly this tells things about the way Chinese media works. So in general, I think we can rest assured that the Chinese media is a very, very interesting mix. And though under Xi there has been a lot of centralization, especially after he became Herrshin, the core, but at the same time, you have a very interesting play happening between retired leaders, the incumbents, and the incoming elite class. So we'll have to keep a very keen eye over that. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Very exhaustive, I must say, the three of you. Professor, My question to you is, you have a whole lineup, you have a whole slew of authors and contributors. Do you want anybody else to speak, or are we going to now start our interaction? Just one second, let me unmute you and Tilak and Shaheli, so we can just keep your audio control so that we can all be talking through this interaction. Dr. Saheli, is your audio unmuted now? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So do you want anybody else to speak, or can we start our interaction?
Let me go back to my contributors and ask them the same question. But I would definitely
we're already
want
45 minutes into our conversation with just talk, and there's no interaction. So
I would definitely want Dr. Shriparna Pathak to mention a few things about South Asia, because most of the audience would be interested in the South Asia portion.
Sure.
Also, Dr. Sana Hashmi, because she has looked at the Taiwan aspect, which is a surprise, because hardly any infections in Taiwan. So a model that can be emulated in other places, especially in a democratic system.
Okay. I'm trying to unmute Dr. Pathak. Can you? I unmuted you. Can you try to unmute?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And who else did you say, Professor? Just one second, Dr. Pathak. Who else did you say, Dr. Pathak and?
Sana Hashmi.
Okay, I'm going to unmute. Sana, I'm going to unmute you also so that you're set and ready. I don't want to do this later. Sana, can you try to unmute yourself also? I've tried to do it. Can you unmute yourself, Sana? Okay, you're done. All right. Very quickly, whatever comments you want to make, because this is a great subject. We'd love to have some interaction, but we're going to run out of time. So we'll start with Dr. Pathak first.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. I'll try and keep my comments very crisp and short. So what I've done in the chapter basically is that I've traced how the COVID-19, how the pandemic spread into Asia, how it came into Asia. And if you look at the 8 countries, I've made a timeline. These infections came from China, these infections came from Iran, and they came from Italy. Bhutan has done the best in terms of controlling the pandemic. Sri Lanka also has done relatively better than the others, and different South Asian countries have used different mechanisms. What I've done in the chapter is that I've outlined the effects in these South Asian countries, primarily in the realms of public health and on the economies. In the section on economy, what I've also tried to do is look at how trade with China gets affected. South Asia does not really represent a very huge market for China. But the fact remains that in this COVID-19 world order, wherein there's an increasing backlash and countries are demanding things like, a pandemic or some sort of pandemic on China, any country becomes important. China has started creating or manufacturing a lot of pandemics, and these can be very exported to these countries. So how has China to these countries been affected so far? So that we can understand where China is headed in terms of its economic link in South Asia. What I've done also in this chapter is that I've tried to look at China's medical diplomacy in South Asia, so as to understand if there would be any implication of China's medical diplomacy in South Asia. If it has any sort of implication on China's rise as an important player in the international system. In the past few weeks and days, we've noticed that China has had the first foreign ministerial level meeting with Nepal, with Pakistan, with Afghanistan and China, and they've kept mentioning as to how the role of the WHO has to be strengthened, how BRI projects have to be started. They've also had the third vice ministerial level meeting, in which China again said all of these. So, in a span of just 2 weeks, these 2 meetings, they symbolize how important South Asia could be for China. At a time when the world, a lot of countries in the world are engaged in some sort of a backlash against China, South Asia becomes very important. All these countries, India's neighbors, they become important. What I also look into very briefly in the section on India is the clashes at Galwan, and how they have been unfolding, but not really delved into that because that's really a part of China's medical diplomacy. But there's a slight touch upon that topic as well. The conclusion part of this chapter is whether China has the potential to emerge as a leader. And what I've tried to do is I've mentioned the flashpoints which have been emerging in South Asia against China in the past with respect to problematic PPE kits, or there were some local level clashes in Mymensingh in Nepal against Chinese workers. How could all of this impact China's relations with South Asia? This, in a nutshell, this is what the chapter is about. Thank you. Thank
you. Quickly moving on to Sana, please.
Very good evening to all, and thank you FCC for hosting us. So I have written a chapter on Taiwan's impeccable response. I'm currently in Taiwan, and I'm seeing how they have been able to mitigate the threat from the the coronavirus. So in this chapter, I basically tried to highlight what has been Taiwan's government's strategy to deal with the COVID-19, and what were the main reasons behind Taiwan's response. So in this chapter, I will also try to highlight what has been Taiwan's, how Taiwan has been able to employ diplomacy amid China's attempts to shrink Taiwan's international space, and what are the implications for Taiwan's response on cross-strait ties, and also how Taiwan is going to utilize this situation to improve its international standing. So what Taiwan has been able to do, I believe that it is not only going to help Taiwan at the global stage, but also I think it is a win-win situation. This phrase I could use, which China has been using. So I believe that it's also going to be helpful for the countries if other countries are going to learn from Taiwan's best practices. So it's like a win-win situation for Taiwan and also the countries. So I've tried to highlight how Taiwan could be proactive and other countries would be proactive in dealing and engaging with Taiwan. So this is the main crux of my chapter. And I'd be happy to answer questions because I could see that there were a few questions about Taiwan and if India and Taiwan could cooperate. So I'd be happy to answer those questions.
We're not supposed to look at the questions. I'm supposed to look at the questions. I'm just kidding you. Listen, thank you very much. Professor, any more additions before we really move on to the questions?
Yes, Dr. Darby, Abhishek Kumar Darby. There is a question to him on Africa-China relations.
No, but do we want to address the question as questions, or do you want him to speak right now? Because I thought we've done enough of speaking. Now let's take questions.
I thought since it has been raised, so he should address this. Secondly, Dr. Amrita Jash will also have her view on China-Japan relations because this is another democratic model which India possibly can learn from.
Okay, so these are comments right now from these two people, and then we will get to the specific questions. But if you have seen any question that is of your subject, please go ahead and answer it so that we don't have to come back to you again in the interest of time. So we'll start with Abhishek. Abhishek, are you unmuted? Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. So the question is that how China is supporting Africa in dealing with COVID-19. So actually, China has found an opportunity in Africa against the China lab theory. And therefore, I see at multiple level, China has engaged. It's all has at multiple level they have engaged to actually help Africa, and at the government level and at the company level, that most of the private companies such as Huawei and Alibaba, and also at military level, but that is limited only to South Africa. And then you have also at people to people level some kind of contribution from the Chinese citizen in Africa, and this is largely backed by the Chinese embassy, and the most of the initiative is taken by the Chinese embassy. So I see it as an opportunity for the Chinese, and from the top leadership to the lower level till the embassy level, there has been a regular hotline talks, and Xi Jinping has actually called to many head of state in Africa during this China lab theory proposed by the West. And also Wang Yi called almost every foreign ministers in Africa, and also at the consulate and the embassy level. So they have dealt quite well, and there is a confidence in the relation. And the most of the African countries, they have discredited this theory, and they have stood with China. Thank you, sir.
Who else was going to speak? Professor Kondapalli?
Dr. Jash, would you like to come in?
Where is Dr. Jash? I have to find it. Doctor, how do you spell the full name?
Amrita Jash.
Amrita, I found. Okay, are you unmuted now, Amrita? Yeah, go ahead.
Firstly, I would like to extend my gratitude to FCC for hosting us. And as Professor Kondapalli has given me this opportunity to highlight the Japan model. Japan, in my study, has been an exception in many ways regarding the COVID crisis. Firstly, its proximity to China. And it was the first country outside of after China to report its first case on 15 Jan. And there were several other things that makes Japan interesting, because as we know, COVID-19 has impacted the elderly population the most, and Japan has over 50% aged population. But despite that, Japan just still stands at just little over 22,000 cases till date. So it's, and also Diamond Princess was the first cluster case, which was at Yokohama port in Japan. All these factors make Japan an interesting case study, and also more precisely for understanding of China-Japan relations under this context. Given there were many, it was supposed to be the fourth maiden visit by a Chinese president in the history since 1972, which was marred by the COVID crisis. The Olympics, which was seen by Japan as an opportunity for its economic recovery, was marred again. Thirdly, we see that China is one of the biggest contributor to Japanese economy, given tourism. And the month of July to August is the month where you see a maximum tourism. But given the Olympics were suspended, you see a total downfall in the Japanese economy. And the biggest possibility or the change factor in the relations comes with Shinzo Abe's stimulus package, where he has informed that out of the 235 billion yen, 222 will be invested in bringing the companies back to Japan. So these are the interesting factors which make China-Japan relations in the coming decades, in the post-COVID era, an interesting time zone. The fragile ties which were supposed to get stabilized are, in my opinion, are going to get much fragile in the coming terms. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. What do you say, Professor? Are we done with the speakers? Can we move on to the questions now?
Yes, indeed.
Okay. So my first comment, my feeling, I hope is this a book for institutions, libraries, for general people interested in China and international relations? Because it seems to have a lot of meat and potatoes, as I would say. There's a lot of good stuff in it. I mean, you've got 18 people contributing with their strengths and wisdom and knowledge, and very specific chapters, which tackle pretty much almost, I would say, every aspect of how you could look at COVID-19 and China.
Indeed, I think there is a growing interest in India and abroad on looking at the dynamics in China, partly because China has become the second largest economy in the world. You look at all the products in your drawing room, these are mostly made in China. Of course, last 6 months, no one is buying them because of the supply chain disruptions. Here, I would like the contributor, Dr. Priyanka Pandit, to come once again on the economic aspect, but also Ms. Rukmini Gupta on what China means at the global level. let me prompt them to address this issue.
They need to unmute themselves.
Yeah, hi, this is Rukmini. I contributed a chapter on China-US relations in the context of COVID-19. And from my research, what I could see was that rather than COVID-19 being an issue in China-US relations, this was actually politicized by the United States. And its politicization follows an interesting timeline where you see a change in US rhetoric on Chinese culpability, alleged culpability in the spread of this infectious disease globally, related to the number of infections within the United States. So the US rhetoric on China and COVID-19 is very much a sort of reflection of US policies domestically and the inability, in my view, of the US administration to tackle this disease domestically. As such, COVID-19 has become an inflection point for the relationship between the China and the United States, but it in itself is not the primary issue. So the tensions that we see talked about in the media from diplomatic rostra are all emblematic of the different worldviews that China and the United States hold. And COVID-19 has given the United States the sort of forum or the rationale or the opportunity to talk about economic issues that of long-standing and of military issues and military competition. So in that sense, COVID-19 is not a direct issue between China and the United States, beyond providing an opportunity to redress what the US thinks of as economic and military stressors within the relationship. So I can talk about this more, but let me leave space for Priyanka to talk about the economics of this. Could the host please unmute Priyanka? She's unable to unmute herself.
Where is Priyanka? I'm trying to find her.
Priyanka Pandit.
I'm going through the entire list of people and I can't seem to. She listed by some other name, I don't see her.
No, it's...
But you know, it's allowed. I mean, I have allowed people to unmute themselves. I don't do this now. Priyanka, can you talk now? Yeah. Go ahead. You muted yourself. I just unmuted you. Okay, go ahead now.
Yes, please. Yeah. Thank you for the question and thank you for the opportunity. Okay, so there's this entire debate about the global value chains which took off with the coronavirus crisis, the health-induced economic crisis. And of course, China is the center of this debate. And the debate, of course, pertains to reducing dependence on China in the global value chains, either through diversifying supply networks or bringing production home, reshoring, diversifying. So these were doing rounds during the pandemic. And also, we all are aware that this is the debate which has taken off because of the kind of controversy that the China's engagement with the World Health Organization, debate triggered off by the controversy, and something that United States had taken cognizance of, serious cognizance of, and questioned the critical dependence that many countries have on China on many of the critical products. And also coming to this debate, what we need to understand that the entire debate about the global value chains no longer rests on the single issue now. The very nature of the global value chains is changing in the coronavirus pandemic. The COVID-19 has changed the very nature of the global value chain. It is now the mode of interactions have changed rapidly. So with firms adopting technological solutions to strike a balance between social distancing norms and economic activities, So of course, reshoring of GVCs will happen, but then it is the automation drive that the countries are going for. And then in this regard, we also need to understand that China has been the lead in terms of automation in its manufacturing activities. And also, as GVCs are likely to become more regional in nature, global value chains, by moving closer to consumer markets and consolidated in terms of activities, there will be some kind of shifting away of supply chains from China, but reducing the entire dependence will be difficult, because a lot of countries, including India, are dependent on China for the intermediate components, if not for the finished products, or if not for the raw materials, of course, but also the nature of the intermediate components, the assembled products from China. And as the alternatives, of course, are being talked about, we also need to understand that China is deeply integrated into the global manufacturing chains, and any diversification will be difficult in the post-pandemic period because of two reasons. The global economy currently, the recovery of the global economy currently also depends on, is contingent upon China's economic recovery, how fast Chinese economy is able to recover. And then the question of diversification comes in, which is going to be a very costly as well as an onerous task. Therefore, currently what I feel, the challenge that Chinese economy faces, and also the other economies faces, in terms of reconciling between the interactive mode of business activities and the online, and maintaining the social distancing now, is something that the countries have to tackle with. And China has done really a good job here. I would like to bring in the Chinese experience of dealing with the pandemic and restoring production after the in the post-lockdown phase. They came up with some innovative ideas. For example, they started some internal information platform, Huatong, where they provided timely information to the employees. They showed up their national logistics system. They instead of layoffs, they went for a relocation and reallocation of the labor force in a creative way. They outsourced them even to the companies in the health sector. These were the sector which picked up in the lockdown phase, and some of them also operated through social media platforms such as the WeChat, popular Chinese social media app, to communicate and coordinate with the employees. So I think these companies, not only the Chinese experience, what it clearly shows that these companies not only leverage digital tools to influence customers, but also virtually engage them in online sales.
I go back to my question. Is this book mostly for institutions, libraries, for reading by people who want to do international relations? This is not just a regular book, but it's very interesting. But let that answer come in other questions. Mike, let me pose the first question, which has come from one of our audience. Is from Mr. Saidas. I think the first part of the question has been answered. What is the impact on China's diplomacy and the world influence post-COVID? I think that part has been answered by many of you. But very specifically, Professor Kondapalli, give us an overview on, do you think Beijing has managed its image problem? Very short.
Can you please come again?
Do you think Beijing has managed the image problem? That means, has it been able to salvage its image through this crisis, of how it's being castigated, blamed for many things, and how it's, playing a very heavy-handed, sometimes diplomatic and other roles?
Not yet. The Chinese have definitely an image problem. If you look at the Dutch cartoons, if you look at the others, the image has been punctured. China rise has been a positive news before, but with COVID-19, that image has taken a beating. And China released a white paper on COVID-19 in order to say that they are efficient, they are transparent, they are effective in addressing COVID-19. But as you all know, the number of cases have actually been increasing. The number of deaths have already increased substantially. So this suggests the Chinese contribution has not been very effective as of now. You cannot simply say that we have given 70 billion masks, X number of PPEs, or ventilators. There needs to be much more that China could do in terms of addressing the COVID-19. Definitely the image has taken a beating with the COVID-19 related.
So
let me request Mrutika Guha Sarkar on Australia's criticism on the COVID-19 related, because Australia took the lead when the US was in the background. It was Australia which took the lead in this.
Go ahead, unmute yourself, please. Yeah.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay. So, as Professor Kondapalli, sir, he's already covered most of the parts. Australia, the criticisms which have majorly come from Australia, I would relate it to the factor that it's majorly about the responses China, the kind of responses that China has come up with when we talk about the leading Australia's leading call for an independent inquiry, and something which is something which is more of, in my chapter, which I have argued about, has been more confrontational, and which is something which has affected the bilateral relations to a level that we can even say that there is a new low in the relations. And at the same point of time, what it has done is that it has kind of brought a lot of pressure points in the bilateral relations to the limelight. For instance, China's intervention and intrusion in Australian politics when it comes to its donations to Australian parties, or the 5G issue, Australia being the first country to kind of ban Huawei implicitly, of course. To a lot of other pressure points which I have discussed in my chapter, where COVID-19 has kind of brought into the limelight of the administrations, the policymakers. At the same point of time, what COVID-19 has also done when we're talking about the image China holds in Australia, or the image Australia as a country holds in China. For example, this report by Lowy Institute in 2020, what it kind of showed was that there was this increase of the number of people considering China more of a security concern than an economic partner. The numbers are rising, which kind of hints at how Australia is looking at China right now, and this is something which would this is something which would continue in the future. I don't see this entire narrative going fading away. At the same time, there have been reports by China which don't look at Australia that positively as a destination for trade, as a destination for tourism, as a destination for education. Talking about Sheng Shuang's the statement where he talked about why should China look at Australia as a trading partner or a tourism destination or an education source, as an education destination for its students to go, hinting at a kind of retaliation by China. And it did so by banning beef and putting tariffs on barley. So yeah, when we look at the Sino-Australian relations amidst COVID-19, it has impacted greatly in terms of, worsening the relations in some way. At the same point of time, also bringing a lot of other pressure points of the bilateral relations.
Great. Let me come back to the questions. Professor, I would really appreciate if we can focus first on the questions. I know that probably everybody has contributed so many things and chapters that they would like to speak, but let's get the questions out of the way and then we'll come back to other things. Very specifically, anybody who wants to talk, maybe Tilak, on what are the lessons for, Mr. K.M. Gupta has asked, what are the lessons for Indian media to understand, analyze and report based on China and COVID-19? Is there a draw of lessons on how China has behaved and how China has taken to its media and how Chinese media has behaved. And also there's a tail end to the question on any suggestions to change how China is reported in Indian media. See, this is a huge issue where the world has focused on China because of COVID-19. And naturally, India has focused now on China because of COVID-19 and now Ladakh. So any one of you who looks at media very closely, I thought Tilak was talking a little bit about media, so that's why I said. So who would like to comment on this particular aspect?
Tilak, please go ahead.
Okay, sir. Well, essentially, I think if you see the case of Indian media in general, I think we are not even able to figure out, I think most of the media stories in India, they do not tend to, I mean, of course, some of them do very well, but if you see, I think if you just keep a watch of how there have been COVID trackers, which have been put up by, I think compared to by Hindustan Times or Times of India, compared to how New York Times or Washington Post, other Western agencies have done. We are not even using the open source materials that's available. So we do not have news agencies focusing on putting up COVID trackers. And then, of course, verifying news. By the way, I think compared to Chinese media, it's definitely a much better scenario that we have. So absolutely no comparison to Chinese media. I think in China's case, even the news doesn't come out. But I think what is important to point here out is that that does not justify the fact that we do not put our effort from our side. And if you see how the Chinese have essentially tried to use Indian media, I think they have done very substantial, not just in India for that matter. They have done it in Western countries. I think the US ambassador to America, Cui Kai, he's almost every day on Twitter, is giving all sorts of a statement. That's something which has Chinese diplomats have become fairly super active on Twitter across the world, and especially in Western countries, including in Latin America and in Africa. I think there was one question related to Africa as well that was sort of answers that. So you see that super activism on Twitter is something which we see in India as well. I think we have at least the Chinese ambassador to India, Sun Weitong, and the official spokesperson of the embassy is there on Twitter, fairly active. And I think not just on Twitter, but apart from that, they have been contributing articles in the newspaper. We know what happened with one interview that PTI published. So you see, I think at the same time, we also need to be open about listening to all kinds of views. I would also like to we have Saibal Da here, so maybe I think this is one topic which he has covered China substantially, so I think he would be very happy.
Yeah, I was actually going to do that, Tilak. I was going to actually go to Saibal and ask him, what is your feelings? Saibal, you spent so much time in China and you know the country and the subject. How is China reported in Indian media, and particularly during this COVID-19 and of course that Ladakh crisis?
You mean China reported in Indian media?
Yeah.
Well, I think...
No, not you. I was asking Saibal. Is Saibal here?
Okay. Yeah.
Saibal da. Where is he?
You need to unmute.
Where is he?
There is a mute button on the left-hand bottom.
Okay. Can you hear?
Yeah, please.
Okay. How is China seen in India? China is not seen in India in very friendly terms for a variety of reasons, and COVID-19 added to that many reasons that Indians have grouse about Chinese. And then we have Atmanirbhar Bharat coming in, becoming a national policy, and the whole, I mean, India has responded more strongly than any other country, if you look at it, even compared to the US, because US has been talking about it. India is actually cutting down on imports, taken specific action to cut down on imports. So these are major policy decisions that will have long-standing impact on everything, our relationship, not just that, our economy, our political system, the way we treat our neighbors, everything. But anyway, the point is we are largely influenced by the Western take on China, rather than we have very few people like Kondapalli and his team to do exhaustive research on the ground, to go into great details, study things meticulously, and tell us what is really happening in China. We often tend to go the Western media way or the Western political thought we adopt, and we start looking at China from their perspective and not create our own perspective. We are also clouded by our relationship with Pakistan and other issues. So there is, in a country where WhatsApp has become so important, it's almost a media now. We have a situation where people very gravely, seriously think that China manufactured the virus and spread it. And they also made sure that only 2 or 3 provinces got affected and the rest of the country was not hugely affected. This question is constantly coming up in the Indian mind and also in other countries. How did it jump from 2 or 3 provinces in China to straight away to Italy or to Iran and to Thailand without really affecting, let's say, 27 other provinces in China? Not more than 4 provinces have been badly affected. Was it a very excellent management of health resources, but higher quality health resources that China had? Is it because the Chinese have a better control and command system? Is it because they don't have to respond to political comments and criticisms on the media? There could be a lot of reasons, and people in India are constantly asking those reasons. So at one stage, at one level, we have a very critical view of China. At another level, we have a lot of thinking about China. This is very interesting. If you talk to Americans, if you talk to Europeans, they don't think so much about China. We seem to be constantly, you see, China has become a new obsession. Earlier, Pakistan was an obsession. Today, China has become an obsession. We constantly worry about China. We constantly think about China. We are constantly suspicious about China. So you see, the entire country is in some ways, if you look at the top 10 issues that are on the minds of the people, I think China would be one of the top 10, which is very interesting because you would expect domestic issues to be on the top of the mind. But if you look at it, maybe number 9 and number 10 would be Pakistan and China. China has become, in some ways, very important to Indians, and this is one part. The second part, I said we don't do much research. The third part is that we have really not tried to understand China. Some very few Indians have studied Chinese, compared to a lot of Chinese who have studied various aspects of India, in languages, Indian music, yoga, many other things. So we are not a very open-minded society when it comes to international relations. How many of us studied Sri Lanka, for God's sake, and Bangladesh, and for that matter, Nepal? We don't. You see, we in the past we used to admire Japan, but Japan is a close country to us. We don't know what it is to develop society. So somewhere we are not an open society. This kind of discussion FCC has, we need a lot more discussion and a lot more, sort of investigation, and not just by journalists, but think tanks and authors to go into great details and try to understand what countries are. You see, China is not just Xi Jinping, more than Xi Jinping. There are various aspects to Chinese relationship with India, and maybe we should broaden our mind, and that is one. And at the same time, we should have our own perspective on issues, not about China, but about everything else, instead of taking the Western narrative as the sole thing. And more so, in a world where the Western narrative is being challenged by its own president. So you have a world situation where the president of the United States does not accept the narrative of the media in the US, although on a domestic issue, but generally this is a great opportunity for us, for some of us, if not all, to look at our relationships with all our neighbors in a more in-depth fashion instead of getting swayed.
Thank you, Sabalda. Very quickly, some of the important questions that I see here, because some of them have already been answered directly or indirectly by the comments made by various speakers. But let me come to some other ones. One, very briefly, do you think this COVID-19 is going to impact foreign students coming to China? Those people who were coming as students to China to educate themselves, will they be scared, their families scared, or they just wouldn't want to come, their countries wouldn't want to send them, scholarships would stop? Or do you think China is now going to go out of its way to woo foreign students and bring them in, because that's a part of their public diplomacy? Professor, to you.
Yes, this is an interesting question because as part of the Belt and Road Initiative, President Xi Jinping announced nearly 15,000 scholarships to students, mainly African students and Latin American, but also from other Asian countries, Central Asia, Southeast Asia specifically. So there has been a move on that direction. So COVID-19 affects the flow of these. And in general, in the last 10 years, China had showcased itself as a destination for talent, both inviting the returned Chinese students from the US and European universities, but also trying to recruit the faculty members, but also in terms of inviting students from other places. India has been one of the most successful in this drive, especially in terms of medical students. There are nearly 28,000 Indian students studying in China, mainly focused in Tianjin and Guangzhou, but also in other cities where you find 200, 300 or 400 Indian students in these places. Not so much in social sciences or in other aspects, but mainly in the medical sciences because of the craze in India about medical sciences. So that is one aspect. But definitely COVID-19 is going to affect the flow of the student community into China because of the social distancing and other factors. Although let me say that Chinese universities have already begun the classes, first online, but also there are the physical classes being organized. There has been a forward momentum in this direction. But nevertheless, for instance, when we evacuated through 3 times, the Indian Air India plus the Indian Air Force, which evacuated the 700 odd Indian students from Wuhan, many of them have not been able to go back because of the situation in Wuhan. Although since April 2nd week, Wuhan has been relatively quiet. The infections rates have actually come down. This also is related to your question on the image problem. And there is a serious debate within China on 3 aspects of the COVID-19. One is in relation to responsibility. Who takes responsibility for the outbreak of this COVID-19? Second is in relation to an apology. Chinese leadership has been very keen on other countries apologizing to them, especially the Japanese, for what happened in the 1930s or 40s. But today there are some murmurs and they are waking up to this suggestion that some country may ask them an apology for the COVID-19 outbreak. Thirdly, there is a debate within China and trying to cope up with this is on compensation. As you know, in Gorakhpur or Azamgarh, there was a court case of seeking compensation, and there are also an Indian Jurist Association which is filing a case on China with the permission of the Government of India or others to go to the International Court of Justice on this. In the US, there are several cases that have been filed in Wisconsin and other places. So they are now waking up. Chinese are now waking up with this new debate on compensation. What do we do if there is a compensation? Of course, they have the immunity because of the sovereignty-related factors, but sovereignty-related factors will also bring in the responsibility factor. If an individual Pakistani or a Chinese is a terrorist, then that country is responsible for the actions that individual conducts according to the 1267 Committee of the United Nations Security Council on counterterrorism. Likewise, there is a debate now on the responsibility factor, and this is a big nightmare for China today on responsibility, compensation, and apology.
That was a very fair answer, but does your book overall, all these chapters by 18 contributors, what sort of a direction does it communicate overall? Because we haven't read the book. By the time some of us get to reading the book, just trying to spice up the conversation here. Does it convey a sense that China actually, whether deliberately or not, I'm not getting into that, but did China falter by not telling the world? I'm not even going into the whole WHO situation because somebody alluded to that, one of your writers, what was the relationship, the controversial relationship between WHO and China? But did China falter in telling the world, in sharing and cooperating with the world on the menace of COVID-19, which they were already facing before it got out and it really started killing people, and the country started waking up to it, and then WHO woke up to it? So what does your book in the sense of chapters communicates on this particular aspect?
Before I ask Pawan to intervene on WHO, he had some substantial research done on that topic, WHO and China. Before that, I would suggest that China is responsible for this, especially prior to January 23rd, when Wuhan mayor himself said 5 million people got out of Wuhan, creating what we have seen, the infections abroad. So there is a problem there, and the Huanan seafood market had been cleaned up. In other words, the evidence has been destroyed in terms of any human-to-human transmission. So there is a problem for China in addressing this. Of course, President Xi Jinping in the WHO meeting, in the online meeting, he said there will be an impartial, independent, comprehensive investigation into the COVID-19 origins. But there was a caveat. He suggested only after the COVID infections subside. Since we have not seen any subsiding of these cases, so this is an open-ended investigation, which means that probably much of the evidence we will not be able to get it. Secondly, the Australian Saturday Tribune suggested that there has been a bioweapon program. Dr. Shri Chang Li worked in Australia as well as in the US in such programs. So far there has not been any communication officially from China. There is a denial, but there is no major approach in this direction. So this is still an open-ended question in terms of the bioweapon related aspect, because the evidence has been removed. So there has not been substantial input in this regard. So we were also clueless because the evidence has not been provided in the Chinese sources. Although many Chinese sources in terms of modeling have argued, including official ones, that if China would have taken action on January 3rd or January 4th, instead of January 23rd, they could have actually avoided something like 1 million cases going abroad. So this has been the major problem. Let me ask Pawan to intervene.
Yeah.
Am I audible, sir?
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as far as your question is concerned, I think we're talking about the influence China has on WHO. Like Sir mentioned, China does owe some responsibility for the tardiness of its initial response. And if you look at the revised timeline posted on the WHO website, the first intimation that WHO had came from its own local offices, which got information about a new pandemic, a pneumonia pandemic spreading in Wuhan. So, contrary to what a lot of Chinese reporting has been on China being upfront with WHO on providing information, this contradicts some of those claims. Secondly, like Professor Kondapalli also mentioned about the Associated Press reporting on the outbreak of the virus in the initial stages. That report does not support either the Chinese version or the Western version on how the virus spread. It rather paints a picture of an organization which is trying to get the best information from China in the relative relative resources it has. One of the speakers earlier mentioned about WHO being a casualty of the US-China relations sometime in March. And that's also true because to a certain extent, if you look at the leadership of Tedros, as a General Secretary of the WHO, he has to balance between the public health concerns and the political and economic concerns of each country. This gets complicated because a country like US, which was a major contributor to WHO funding, withdrew from that position, which makes China today the single most important contributor to WHO funds. While most of the WHO funding comes from the voluntary contributions, China today is the single largest provider of the membership fee component of WHO funding. So that gives it a lot of leverage within the organization. And in the past years, most of Chinese interest has been on three aspects. It's either about monitoring and surveilling pandemic influenza, or it has paid a lot of attention to implementation of international health regulations. These are the agreements which sort of stipulate the role that countries play during a pandemic. And thirdly, and most importantly, it has to do with the Taiwan's relations with WHO, which is essentially the consequence of China's politics between WHO and Taiwan relations. So if this were not the case, then the information that Taiwan had provided or the clarification that Taiwan had sought from the WHO around 23rd of December regarding a new pandemic, pneumonia pocket emerging in Wuhan, probably the organization could have skipped into action at a much earlier date. But unfortunately, Taiwan's ties with WHO are hugely dependent on China's relations with Taiwan.
You know, my take on this is that what COVID-19 has done to WHO, something like COVID-19 should do to UN also, because we need a rejigging of these organizations. These multilateral organizations have existed without, without contemporary channelization in a long time. I mean, they need to be rejigged completely. What is the point of US leaving and India playing a half-hearted role, China giving all the contributions to WHO? WHO might as well not exist. I don't think they can create a vaccine. Anyway, what I'd like to do is right now, before I take any more questions, I had sort of forgotten, this is my mistake. I would like to acknowledge the presence of a very dear colleague, friend, and a senior journalist, who is Vijay Naik. He's the president of the Indian Association of Foreign Affairs Correspondents, and we do a lot of these interesting seminars, webinars with Vijay and the association. So thank you, Vijay, for joining us. And very briefly, Vijay, I want you to comment on something which would be of direct interest to, of course, foreign correspondents and media here, because we are slightly deviating, guys. Remember, you're addressing the media and foreign correspondents mostly based in India, South Asia, covering South Asia, and looking at China, but from a South Asia vantage point. How would you look at this, Vijay?
Well, I think, can you hear me?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, first, let me congratulate Professor Kondapalli and also our friend Mr. Venkat Narayan and you especially for organizing this kind of meeting and webinar. I think this is the book which has come out of now is a very apt book, very timely publication. I think that will give a overall view of what is happening between China, COVID, and the world actually. So I feel that this is a good augury and the right time for the book to come. But what I feel is that as the other members also had said, that how India is looking at this particular aspect of COVID and China, you see. Now I think the things have got enmeshed because COVID has come along with Galwan and Ladakh actually. See. So what we are looking at, two aspects of the situation now. Now my view or my question to Mr. Kondapalli actually is that what does he think, or what the panelists actually think about the trade between India and China and how COVID is going to affect it. Now, everybody knows that our trade has gone to $90 billion with China. And now we are talking, as the Prime Minister had recently said, that there has to be Atmanirbhar Bharat. Now, having depended on China, India almost for the last 20 years on very small things also, and the trade which has gone up to $90 billion, is it possible for India or even the world to reverse the trend actually? I would like Dr. Kondapalli to say something about this. And secondly, I want to say that recently the American Secretary of State Pompeo is talking about a coalition of democracies that should come together to actually face China or to confront China. Now, is it possible, Mr. Kondapalli, Professor Kondapalli, whether this kind of coalition of democracies can arise or can be formed actually? Now, these are the things which come to my mind. And secondly, when we talk about China, in fact, what Manish said, we had a lot of Chinese guests also talking to our members in the association. And we have invited ambassadors of China also to talk to us also. In the last 20 years, I feel that the relations between India and China have been somewhat, I wouldn't call it a roller coaster of friendship, but they were good relations actually. And there have been people-to-people contact, there were intellectuals were going. There was an editors forum between India and China, which has been there for almost about 4 to 5 years. Now, when these things were happening, suddenly we find COVID as well as the earlier thing that was Depsang, and now we find what is happening in Galwan now. Are we going in the reverse direction so far as India and China are concerned? Are we going to reverse our trade balance between India and China? And what kind of future Mr. Kondapalli and other members see so far as India and China are concerned and China and the world are concerned? Thank you.
Those are loaded questions, Vijay. I mean, these guys could answer it for the rest of the evening, but let's start with the first one, the most important one that Vijay has pointed out. One, can India, just from an Indian point of view, and we are all Indians sitting here, but some of us have done overseas joint. Can India afford a financial standoff with China, and is India ready to? I mean, this talk about Atmanirbhar Bharat, are we ready to? That means, one, can we afford? Two, are we already on the path and ready to take on China?
Manish, may I?
Sorry, go ahead.
May I add to what Vijay was saying?
Yeah.
Shrikant, the trade India has with China accounts for barely 1%, less than 1% of China's global trade. You know, we import APIs from China. For every dollar we spend on importing things from China, we export, and we make $4 for every dollar we spend on buying things from China. Now, if India tries to put a stop to doing business with China, is that going to make any difference to China? Number one, and what kind of harm the ban on import of APIs and things we use in automobiles is going to do to the Indian business community and India's trade with the global affairs, and also how clever is the government of India's decision to ban the teaching of Mandarin in Indian schools and colleges. And what do you think about the Confucius Institute, asking the Chinese to close them down? I mean, hello, China, every fourth person on the planet is a Chinese. Every fifth person on the planet is an Indian. Now, Galwan, it will be sorted out sooner than later. But it's a question of relations between two countries which account for more than 40% of the global population. Shrikant, what do you think about that? Thank you.
Can I answer this?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Vijay ji and Gupta ji and Venkat Narayan Garu. I think in relation to trade aspects, bilateral trade related issues, the GOI position is actually very tentative because much of the trade is done by the private individuals, chambers of commerce and others. Much of the trade is through Guangzhou Fair, where every year bulk of the orders are gathered by the Indian communities, business communities. Second is in Yiwu in Zhejiang province. So these are the bulk of the orders that generally we get. Secondly, the component of trade is something like 28% generator sets, power equipment. Some 22% is the consumer durables like air conditioners or other consumer durables. So substantial portion of China's exports to India are related to this. And as you all know, the 49 apps, new apps have been targeted in addition to the 59 applications before, about 1.5 months ago. So much of this is of value of something like $18 billion for the Chinese. And this includes TikTok, UC browser, Likey, or other applications. Now, Indian ban as such does not affect them in substantial manner. But if the contagion spreads, if other countries also look at this ban, I think this is going to be substantial. For instance, soon after the Indian ban, the TikTok or Douyin, the Chinese version, Douyin's stock market valuation has come down. Secondly, many of these applications are going down in terms of their values. So cumulatively, this will have an impact on the Chinese apps in future. If India carries forward the Huawei 5G non-allowance, this will also add up to the Chinese pressure. Because remember, unlike the Indian private sector, the Chinese private sector also has Communist Party branches. And they will have to communicate to the Central Committee on the losses that they suffer, not just due to the Indian ban, but also due to the global responses. So there is a connection between the Chinese private enterprises and the Communist Party, unlike the Indian private enterprise, which is kind of loose in nature. So this structural difference, I think, will have some impact on China. Although, as Mr. Venkat Narayan mentioned, this is just about 1% of the Chinese trade. But China will suffer because of the cumulative effect that it will have on many Chinese companies, number one. Number two, there is also now a process of decoupling that has been announced. We have seen in January about investments in infrastructure. Mr. Gadkari made some comments. Incidentally, Mr. Nitin Gadkari also said the virus that originated in Wuhan could have been a bioweapon. He is the first minister who stated this, which is quite surprising. We do not know on what basis he said this, but nevertheless, that is an inclination of at least one section within the Indian establishment view. The third is we have seen some restrictions on Chinese investments in the other sectors. For example, in the infrastructure in Uttar Pradesh or in other places. So I think we have not announced a decoupling, but day before yesterday, there was a announcement in relation to restrictions on the 10 pillars that has been agreed to in 2017 December. This is related to tourism, youth exchanges, museum management, Chinese language, as has been mentioned, or the other, some 10 pillars in all. There is going to be some pressure going to be built up on this. China may not suffer substantially and immediately because of COVID-19 related aspects, but cumulatively, I think it is going to affect China as long as the Chinese troops are located in Depsang Plains and in Pankung So between finger 4 to finger 8. I think the Indian government is going to put pressure. Remember, Dr. Jaishankar mentioned that the Galwan incident will have a serious consequence on the bilateral relations, and we are witnessing that serious consequence. My belief is that this is going to be incremental right now, but this will become substantial in the longer term. The Indian effort since President Pratibha Patil's visit to China in June 2010 is to reduce the trade deficits. But 10 years hence, we did not reduce the trade deficits. And China does not allow the Indian products to be sold in the Chinese market due to the non-tariff barriers or through other restrictive trade practices. And hence, this is also one of the key issues in the RCEP or other arrangements with China. So I want to stop here, but give a chance to Dr. Ambuj Thakur, because he comes from the Northeast where much of the substantial informal trade happens between India and China. Dr. Ambuj Thakur.
Please unmute yourself, Ambuj. I have unmuted you. Yeah, go ahead. No, your audio. You have an audio issue, Ambuj. I think your microphone is not properly tied in. Can you speak now? Let's see. Go ahead. Can you talk a little bit so I can try to see whether we can hear you properly? Hello? Ambuj, can you talk? We just want to see if we can hear you. I think we have an issue, connection issue there. Professor, can we come back to that later?
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me move on. Let me move on with, there's a couple of interesting questions. On this whole, what's the impact? I don't know. I mean, I'm just giving you an opinion without having been in China at this particular time, but watching it from the outside. But Galwan, COVID-19, China's effect, China's, whole internal, external story with reporting COVID-19 and how it got done. China's out there. It's gone way out on a limb. Do you feel that? And how is that going to impact the whole BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative? And will it boomerang now? All this, will it lead to things, I know Africa in general or Latin America or Caribbean, I mean, you throw money and people need the money, and developing countries can be made to talk or, side along with you. But overall, what we have seen in the last 6-7 months, and vis-a-vis what China has done with India in Galwan, and the whole Western world at least uniting with and behind India, is this going to overall boomerang in China's face or not?
Well, let me say that we have one volume which has been published on the Belt and Road Initiative. So some of the contributors are in our panel today. But straight away to your question, the Belt and Road Initiative has 5 connectivities. One is policy coordination. Second is physical connectivity to road, railway, energy pipelines, fiber optics or airfields, so on. Third is trade promotion. Fourth is in terms of renminbi internationalization or their currency internationalization. And fifth is the people-to-people contacts, basically tourism, education, or other formats. Now with COVID-19, policy coordination suffered because of the image and other problems. Second, connectivity, physical connectivity, except for the CPEC projects, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor project. Yesterday, there was a second road that has now been begun with the Havelian to Kunjara Pass in the Karakoram ranges. That has been initiated according to their official reports. But generally, connectivity issues have become problematic with this COVID-19 because there is a social distancing. There is also travel ban. No international flight has taken place. There is a 130 countries ban on Chinese visitors to these countries because of the virus-related aspect. The third connectivity is in terms of trade promotion. That was also affected with the supply chain disruption between January to March this year, when the virus was in a virulent stage, in China at least. The fourth connectivity, renminbi internationalization, also got affected incidentally by the IMF and World Bank in last month's decision not to allow the Chinese use the SDRs, the special drawing rights related. Incidentally, India also took part in criticizing China on this aspect in the SDR related aspects last month. And finally, people-to-people contact again was disrupted because of the travel ban and other problems. So much so that in 2019, the Belt and Road Initiative meeting attracted 108 countries, while in June this year, the Belt and Road Initiative online meeting had just about 26 foreign ministerials attending. Incidentally, Russian foreign minister did not attend this meeting. Of course, he had a prepared speech. Even though this is an online meeting, the Russian foreign minister avoided the meeting. So which suggested there is some problem brewing up on the Russia-China, on the BRI related aspect. So I suggest that we have to relook at the BRI. Generally, there is a criticism on the BRI in terms of debts, in terms of not so sound financing. Thirdly, in terms of, we saw, for instance, Hambantota port, which has been taken by the Chinese on a 99-year lease. The Mombasa port in Kenya also is under trouble. Tanzania canceled a $20 billion deal because of the problems in the BRI only just a few years ago, a few months ago. Also, there are some problems in Europe in which I think Tenzin Ladon could probably intervene on the European related issue on BRI. I suggest that the BRI we need to have a fresh look at. India has a problem with this because of the CPEC, which is passing through the Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. regions. On the second issue that has been raised on the democracies coming together, the US decision recently, incidentally, we saw the Indian government's position on democracy as a foreign policy instrument has changed under the current dispensation. In 2001, the UPA government and others were reluctant to speak about democracy. If they have spoken about democracy, it was mainly South Asia, in Pakistan, in Nepal, in Bhutan, in other places, in Afghanistan. But in the current dispensation, political dispensation, we saw this has become a global phenomena. For instance, Prime Minister Modi, during his visit to Japan in September 2014, he said, we want to promote democracy abroad. So that was a clear statement from the Ministry of External Affairs perspective as well on promoting democracy. Will these countries get together in terms of opposing China? I think this is a far off reality, not because of any political issue, but because all of them are doing a pragmatic cooperation with every country, not based on democracy, but based on pragmatic cooperation on various issues. And so I think this will be a weaker position, although that is on the agenda. For instance, the Quad is also said as part of the democracies. The US, Australia, Japan, India is also said to be part of the democracies. But I think this is more on pragmatic cooperation or on strategic issues rather than democracies coming together.
Professor, I want to bring in my very senior colleague and the President, Mr. Venkat Narayan, for one simple reason. And you hit that point, and I was going to come to him anyway. Sri Lanka has just elected a new parliament. And with nearly a 2/3 majority, the Rajpakshas are back in big strength. And you just mentioned Hamantota and the whole nexus of the Chinese with Sri Lanka, Maldives, in Indian Ocean, which had been, which had irked India for a long time. And now I think this whole issue has been brought to the fore through Quad and many such relationships. Venkat, tell us, with this new situation in Sri Lanka, a new government coming in, 145 out of 225 seats, won by Rajpaksha, what does it do in South Asia vis-a-vis China? And is the situation going to change, tilt, or will Sri Lanka remain an Indian friend? And then Professor, you on this one. First Venkat, then you.
Manish, the Rajapakshas have won such an impressive majority because the opposition has split. Ranil Wickremesinghe scored a big 0. And so the Chinese and the Sri Lankans have been friends for a long, long time. And Hambantota was offered to India when Manmohan Singh was the Prime Minister. But the UPA had an alliance with the DMK, which was violently opposed to India doing anything to help Sri Lanka, which is why the Sri Lankans went to China for help. So that's the reason why the Chinese got involved in a big way. They gave money to Sri Lanka to build roads and airports. And if you go to Colombo today, if you drive along the Galle Road in front of the Taj Samudra, you cannot believe this huge port coming up. See, they have the money and they are spending it, but the Sri Lankans are happy to take help from China. But China is far away and India is just across the Park Strait, 18 kilometers. And the Rajapaksa brothers will not alienate India by befriending China more. In fact, both the brothers, Gotabaya and Mahinda, have said in interviews while they were in India and elsewhere, we do not want to alienate China and become too friendly with India or vice versa. They will continue to maintain good relations with both China and India because India is very, very important for China. The Colombo port, for example, nearly 50% of the trade is India related, because we don't have a direct route to other parts of the world, primarily because the Park Straits is a very narrow thing and we could not complete that project which we were trying to build. So our exports and imports by sea come via Colombo port. And we have cultural links with Sri Lanka. We have, Bollywood stars, films, music, everything is very popular in Sri Lanka. And you have any Buddhist worth his salt would want to go and pray at Bodh Gaya, go to all the other places related to Lord Buddha and all that. So I do not think that the Rajapakshas will go out of their way to befriend China at the cost of India. It is just that China has the money, they are happy to give it to them because of BRI, and Sri Lanka's strategic location is one of the reasons why the Chinese are investing a lot of money. But I do not think that India's relations with Sri Lanka will be adversely affected in any way just because Mahinda Rajapaksa has now obtained a nearly two-thirds majority, just 5 seats short. And I think they're going to change the constitution and make the presidency primary. And anyway, it will all unfold. But I'm not too worried about the Rajapakshas, consolidating their power on the people of Sri Lanka. And I will not worry too much about their getting closer to China than India. Monish?
Professor, let me come to you.
I agree with.
Just one second. I'm going to twist this a little bit. So Venkat spoke about Sri Lanka only, but there is a reason why China was entering the Indian Ocean right next to India in a very overt, ferocious, aggressive manner. Maldives, wanting to take over Lamugan. I mean, this is an island where you could build a transshipment port. Taking over the transshipment port and building it for Sri Lanka, offering whatever to Bangladesh and Myanmar, working at Gwadar port in Pakistan. I mean, these things are not done simply because we are benevolent and we are big and we want to do BRI. Huh? But the point is, what happens post COVID-19? Is China going to slow down? Is China going to realize that this is not about a rat race with India? This is also because Quad is coming together. The Americans, the Japs, the Australians, and the Indians are banding together. They have the support of the South Koreans also, and many other countries along the Indian Ocean. So what is the post-COVID-19 scenario? I want to hear from you. And Sri Lanka is only one dot in that.
I think during COVID, and we have seen a lot of restrictions in terms of travel. But in relation to Sri Lanka, China announced a $500 million aid. As we were organizing a SARC online meeting, how to address the COVID-19, the Chinese have already given nearly $500 million in aid only about a month ago in order to put up the Sri Lankan economy up. So this is, and the Colombo port project has also been refurbished now with additional funding and so on and so forth. So I think the COVID has not affected the Chinese role in Sri Lanka. And I agree with Mr. Venkat Narayan. The Chinese have been in an advantageous position in relation to the Rajapaksa family and the others investments. But nevertheless, they also make a fine distinction between China and India in relation to the Sri Lankan security Sri Lankan position. Having said that, from an Indian perspective, this is of a major concern, especially in terms of submarine visits by the Chinese to the Indian Ocean region. That's the red line. I think China is crossing those red lines in terms of the submarine visits. Remember, the Germans have downed the British shipping by the U-2 boats during the Second World War. So this is the red line for India. And that is also one reason why we have been strengthening the anti-submarine warfare with P-8I submarine hunters. So this is one aspect of this. Overall, South Asia, China is in an advantageous position because of the COVID. Everyone is inward looking. We are all at home. So China gets an opportunity, including Galwan incident, including other, as you mentioned, in South Asia, in Sri Lanka or other places. So this is advantage China. But I think sooner than later, we will wake up to the challenges coming up in the immediate neighborhood. I would rate the submarine activity as very high in terms of our challenges. Investments portion, fine. It does affect us in the longer run because if Sri Lanka defaults, then we have to go and clean up the country as we are doing in Maldives now after the elections. The Maldivian leader said that the Chinese were grabbing the islands. Mr. Nasheed mentioned about this. So we are doing the cleanup job in Maldives. We may have to do the cleanup job in Sri Lanka tomorrow, probably in Bangladesh, probably in Nepal in the near future, once the government changes in Nepal. So I think there is a concern. Interestingly as well, the Chinese have their own Quad. It includes Nepal, Pakistan, China, and Afghanistan, whose foreign ministers have met in the background of the COVID-19, which suggests the Chinese have some game plan here in the South Asian region. I think we are awake to that. We'll probably take more proactive positions on this.
I have one final question before we close this interaction, unless somebody throws something very nice. You've talked about China and COVID-19, and as a bunch of all of us Indians, especially 18 of you Indians, what is India post-COVID-19 in the context of what you have written as a book? Do you see India emerging stronger, smarter, focus of global attention, Atmanirbhar, growing exports, filling up our coffers in a certain way, or you just feel that this is a downer for China for a little bit and then China will come back again in 6 months?
I think what the volume tried to suggest is, of course, a diversity of views. Each contributor has their own perspective on this. But I would like to state mine here, which is that China is growing at around 3.2% in this quarter in economic growth rates. And the fundamentals of China are still strong, both in the manufacturing as well as in the e-commerce platforms. So they're going to grow substantially next year. This year is obviously, as the IMF expected, we're going to lose something like $8.5 trillion globally. And China will also lose much, especially the first 6 months. But the growth rate will kick up next year, most possibly. Same is the case for India. I think our effort was to basically save the lives. If we would have followed the US pattern or Swedish pattern, we could have had millions of deaths. There was a modeling which was done, which suggested we could have lost 87,000 people in the first 2 months of the COVID outbreak. So I think we saved lives. for the sake of economy in the next year. I think it was a smart move of closing down, shutting down, lockdown, unlike in Sweden or in the US. So given the kind of population profile we have, given the public health budget, which is pretty low, given that, I think we have done well in terms of keeping the number of victims low. But I think next year we will probably get out of this in terms of economic prospects and so on. So my hunch is that we are doing well relatively. Of course, our blot is on the migrant laborers. We could not really take care of them, the 140 million migrant laborers during the initial phases. But there is also a program for that now. The government has come up with some program for this. In China as well, there was a migrant labor problem, as Fang Fang in her Wuhan diary mentions about the migrant labor related issue in China. Since China is not transparent, we do not know the information, despite the best efforts by Dr. Tilak Jha to crack on the information base. We still have a black box there. Because the structure is such, the government structure is such, and Chinese media are said to be the mouthpiece. They call in Chinese Hausha, that is the tongue of the party, which means they have to speak in the same language as the party speaks. Unlike the Indian press, which is vibrant and diversified. So there's a huge difference in this. So we do not know right now the situation, despite our best efforts in this volume. But the fundamentals are relatively strong, both in China and India. So I would assume that this would kickstart next year in terms of the economic growth rate. I wanted to give chance to those who have not spoken. So Tenzin, Ambuj, or others, if you could intervene.
Let's go to Tenzin. Tenzin, yeah.
Thank you. First of all, let me extend my gratitude to Professor Kondapalli for throughout guiding me. And thank you, FCC, for hosting this meeting today. So I have written on China-EU relations and COVID-19. And what I would like to highlight over here is that there are a few points which I think in this discussion we have missed pointing out. So I would like to highlight on that. Under China-EU relations and COVID-19, what I found out was after the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, it has exposed China's larger intention and its strategy in aspiring for a Sino-centric global order. For instance, Xi Jinping and his government have been pushing forward this Sino-centric strategy aggressively under new ideas like the Chinese Dream and new policies like comprehensive diplomacy and security and new institutions like AIIB and under his pet projects like BRI, which poses a direct challenge to the existing rule-based international order, one that is supported by and upheld by the EU. So what happens is this frustration from the EU has been recently seen in expressing in European Commission's recently released joint communication in 2019, which EU has labeled Beijing not only as an economic competitor, but systematic rival promoting alternative models of governance. So this is actually the most critical stand that EU has taken so far. But what it also exposed is the fundamental differences that is there in China and EU, so much so that EU's foreign affairs chief Joseph Borrell has pointed out that the current relations between Brussels and Beijing were always based on trust, weren't always based on trust, transparency, and reciprocity. And secondly, what I would like to highlight is that, which I think is important in discussing China-EU relations, is how after the outbreak of the COVID-19, there's a change in the power dynamic between EU and China. For instance, there are reports coming from where the New York Times reported that the Chinese government has threatened the EU officials for documenting its push on spreading disinformation about COVID-19 pandemic. And what happened is that Beijing's threat not only proved effective, but it was successful in quickly blocking the release of the document. As well as what happened is recently we have seen that the outbreak of the COVID-19 has exposed these fundamental differences, and where the Chinese researcher from Beijing Center for Disease Prevention and Control claimed that the genome sequencing showed that the coronavirus actually came from Europe rather than America, which they previously claimed, right? So what we see is that there is definitely a change in the dynamics in the power relation between China and EU, and also we have come across few Chinese scholars like Yang Fengmin, who is the director of the European Institute at East China University of Science and Technology, who writes that EU does not have the intention to become a global hegemon, and that it is not the cause for any serious political obstacles between EU and China. So what question arises is, does that mean that China truly sees itself moving towards a global ambition to lead, and that since EU does not pose a challenge, that it would lead a stable relationship? So this all encompasses the dynamics between the relation between China and EU. And another important point that I wanted to highlight here also is that with the outbreak of the COVID-19, it has also provided opportunity for China to increase its foothold in targeted European regions like the Central and Eastern European countries, where we have seen that the 17+1 financial grouping meeting that has been taken over by Xi Jinping, which has been earlier convened by Li Keqiang. So we see that there is an increasing importance and significance given to these financial groupings, which have been targeted on specifically on targeted regions. Thank you.
Who else did you want to speak?
Ambuj and Rachit.
Okay.
Is Rachit? Ambuj, I thought spoke earlier, no?
No, I couldn't. There was some.
Oh yeah, there was an audio problem. Okay, you're back.
There was an audio problem. Sorry for the inconvenience, but
no, please go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you FCC and thank you Professor Kondapalli for this opportunity. Now, a lot of regarding this topic, a lot has been covered, but my chapter, which deals specifically with China's relations with Southeast Asia, within the perspective of this COVID-19 pandemic, I had a few findings. The most important thing is, being a student of history as well as China studies, I'm trying to look at it from the perspective of long theory, and China, which claims itself to be a civilizational state, its civilization began in the Huanghe Yangtze Valley, and then gradually it tried to expand its empire, its foothold towards its frontiers. And the most important frontier to cover was the western and the southwestern frontiers. And that took a lot of time. Even till the 1950s, it was an ongoing continuous process. Number two, as John Garber has said, China, unlike the USA, doesn't have a western ocean to fall back on. And that's the reason why, it's one of the principal reasons why it came up with the BRI. Now, when we are talking about BRI, I think when it comes to Southeast Asia, well, since it represents China's soft underbelly. It's going to try very hard not to lose its foothold in this region, and that's the reason why I have categorized these 10 ASEAN nations into, based on China's relationships recently in the past couple of years, and given the COVID crisis, under 3 heads. Number 1, I categorize the China's closest allies, which are based, and I've mentioned Myanmar, I've mentioned Laos and Cambodia, specifically because even during the height of this COVID-19 crisis, when it began, President Xi Jinping makes a visit to Myanmar in January, underscoring the importance of this relationship. They're trying to, push ahead with the China-Myanmar economic corridor, including the Ruili border economic zone, the railway, the pipeline, and having access to the Indian Ocean warm water ports, given what we have already known as skirting the Malacca dilemma, which has been, of course, it's been hyped also to some extent, but still there is some credibility to it. And of course, they're trying to tie up this CMEC with Myanmar's own COVID economic recovery plan of the Myanmar government, where it has invested millions of Myanmarese chats. Number 2, Cambodia, of course, Cambodia, because Hun Sen has been, he has been an ally of China for the past 30 years, and he also makes a visit to China at the beginning of this pandemic. And interestingly enough, while trying to come out with an economic recovery plan, what we notice is, especially if you look at the tourism sector, even if you look at the figures of 2019-20, Chinese tourists accounted for around 38% of all the foreign tourists into Cambodia. And this year, while Cambodia has banned the entry of tourists from the Western nations and also Iran, it is going ahead with this China Ready plan to welcome Chinese tourists back again. So that is something very important that we can note about. Similarly with Laos. Then, of course, the second category, we have the other nations like Malaysia, Indonesia, Brunei, Philippines, etc., and Thailand. And lastly, we have Vietnam and Singapore. Now, Vietnam and Singapore are put in the last category because somewhere they have, they're not standing up to China per se, but then they have tried to maintain their own identity. They are not kowtowing to China, if we can use if you permit me to use that word. Singapore, of course, it's a small city-state, but still it's an economic power on its own. And of course, no BRI projects are listed under the Singaporean head, nor with Vietnam. Vietnam, of course, it has its own doi moi policy. It has been following it since its 6th Party Congress in the 1980s. But for China, Chinese interests in Southeast Asia were first enunciated in some way by this article in Beijing Review in the September 2nd, 1985 issue by Pan Cher. He was a former Vice Minister of Communications, where he stressed the importance of this mainland Southeast Asia for Chinese interests. Given the situation, yes, I feel that this COVID-19 pandemic has come at such a time that it has allowed a lot of governments to try to acquire substantial power through legislative means. And China always finds it easier to deal with, within quotes, authoritarian regimes. It finds it much easier. And going under the rubric of, win-win cooperation and non-interference in each other's affairs, that's to China's benefit. And besides that, there's one funny thing that I would like to know, just add up before I conclude, is there's this very funny incident in Thailand, basically, where, of course, since the junta of 2014, Thai junta of Prayut Chan-o-cha taking over power and Thailand veering towards the Chinese sphere of influence, but there we notice that somewhere there's a disconnect between the people and the government, and recently there was this Twitter war under the hashtag of Navy. It's related to popular Thai actor Viraya Sukaram, where she's perceived to have forwarded some tweets about the acknowledgement, acknowledging that that Taiwan is a separate entity, and then the people in China were really angry. They somehow managed to bypass the firewall. This army of people, and then they tried to pull her down. Came up with many tweets, and then abusing the Thai king and the prime minister, despite the fact that the Thais have some very powerful, less majestic laws, and the Thais also, the Thai people also responding to it very funnily, coming up with terms like Thailand is poor but China is poor. Basically, when they're calling China is poor, they're referring to as Xi Jinping as Winnie the Pooh, which is a strict no-no within China. So these are some funnier aspects also. But as of what we see now, I think China is not going to lose its influence in Southeast Asia. Rather, it's going to get stronger. Given its deep pockets, people are going to look up to China. Even Duterte, he is banking on China for a COVID vaccine. And in fact, in a telephonic conversation with the Chinese president, he was assured that if he's a good neighbor, then they'll be the first beneficiaries of a Chinese vaccine for COVID-19. So I think
you make a very good point, and we understand that this COVID-19 has given opportunity to smaller nations to sort of twist China's arms and say, come on, spend money with us if you really want us to come along with you, and those nations are going to do it. So this opens up an opportunity for those nations, and I think it also opens up, as Professor was saying earlier, an opportunity for China. But we are coming to Rachit, and we are going to close after that because we are heading towards 2.5 hours on this discussion. So Rachit, your last word, and then we go to Mr. Venkat Narayan.
Good evening to one and all. I'm Rachit, and I will be quick. I would like to throw a light upon the shadow of COVID-19 on China-North Korea relations, because North Korea seems to be a very opaque country for most of the people. So coronavirus whether it has reached North Korea or not, it is still a concern throughout the world. So in the third week of January, North Korea closed its border with China and banned all international flights and trains. And it was first country to do so. In the month of March, thousands of people have been quarantined. Approx 5,400 people were released from quarantine. Kim continued to do 4 missile tests. This was a sign that there was no impact of coronavirus on North Korea. But at the same time, on 17th March, Kim built a new hospital, which shows that there was an impact. And from April 21, we see North Korea achieved required nuclearization. So we do not see any missile test during this period. In the month of July, the first suspected case was received in North Korea, which according to Dr. Edwin Salvador, who is WHO representative to North Korea has quarantined 64 first contacts of suspected Kaesong case and 3,571 secondary contacts in state-run facilities for 40 days. So, however, she has offered help to North Korea, making it former Chinese foreign speaks minister Hua Chun-in. She said that China would like to help North Korea through dialogues. Now, there are both positive and negative aspects to it of coronavirus on North Korea. How we see a new low in their relations because of less economic exchanges. And we also see an increased distance between China and North Korea in political and economic sphere. Both will walk alone on their path due to this coronavirus. The outbreak of this virus, however, is a platform also capable enough to take their relationship towards a new strategic comprehensive partnership, emphasizing self-help measures, making them walk alone at international level. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Really, Professor, a two sentence roundup if you want to before I go to Venkat back, because this is time, we have exceeded the time limit way beyond, but it's been very interesting. So sum it up in 2 sentences and then we go to Venkat.
First one is I want to thank everyone. Second, I want to give a chance to Pratibha, MS Pratibha. She has not spoken in this. Thank you.
So we should have said first was from Pratibha. So where's Pratibha? Pratibha ji, please speak.
Yes, hello.
Can you put your video on? We would like to see who we are talking to.
There's some disturbance in the internet,
no
so that's why I have.
No problem, no problem.
I would just like to say that that the most of the discussions has been on how COVID-19 has impacted and influenced China. In this context, if you see the Chinese armed forces, you can definitely see that their influence and the way it has transformed and their impact on the COVID response is quite impactful in so many ways. Number one would be is that for the first time, once they realized that the provincial response has been wanting, the central government very quickly took control of it. And once the central government took control of the COVID response, and one of the organizations that they relied on was the PLA. Now, it shows us a kind of trust in the PLA that they would follow all the party decisions and the party directives to carry out all the operations. It also shows in some ways that the party wanted to test whether most of its command and control, whether it was its logistics, whether it was its theater command, whether it was its civil military integration is going to work in this COVID response. And we see that very successfully they have adapted to the COVID response. And third would be is that what is then the future role for PLA in this kind of very non-traditional security issues? What we see is that the organizations, the services such as the People's Armed Police play a more important role in the non-traditional security threats. And we see them increasingly getting into these kind of operations, for example, not just in COVID. And you could see the kind of the operations that they do in the recent flood control also. So what overall we could see is that the central leadership's ability to use PLA not just for this kind of domestic and non-military operations, but also distinguish itself from other countries like the US, where they had a lot of infection within its military personnel, to show that it's a very strong country with a strong army. And it can, it can use its PLA to have a very successful COVID response. So this kind of image has been quite important for China. Nevertheless, they have taken pains to stress that whatever these kind of non-traditional security operations would be not the mainstay of the PLA, that the PLA would focus mostly on raising its combat capability. So I think that this COVID response has raised the PLA stature. You would also see, in fact, a lot of people have talked about media propaganda. Actually, the PLA was very much involved in the propaganda and distributing propaganda for many of the provinces. And the political department of the PLA was very much involved in this. So I think that through the PLA, the party is able to get some kind of legitimacy for their response. And I'm sure that after this COVID-19, in pandemic in China, you would see a more confident and I would even say like more aggressive Chinese military response as their confidence grow in terms of handling national emergencies. Thank you.
Thank you, Venkat. May I now request you to formally conclude this extensive meeting, which has been very interesting and wish we had more time. But when COVID passes, if it does, with the grace of all of you 18 who have written so extensively about it, and Mr. Shipping, if it passes, when it passes, we'll invite you to FCC to talk individually about the 18 chapters that you, all 18 of you that have contributed to this wonderful chapters. I'm impressed with the knowledge aggregated and put together in this one book, Professor. Credit goes to you and to your team. And I must also compliment you for being an astute political scientist. I have noticed and underlined how you say and don't say things in response to questions. And your team is very politically correct. Venkat, please.
Yeah. Before winding up, Srikanth, I have one small question. This is about COVID and Xi Jinping. You know, since Mao died in 1976, Xi Jinping has now emerged as the most powerful leader in that country, more powerful than Deng Xiaoping was. And I think, you know, he is in control of the party and the army and everything. Now, does he fancy himself and looking at himself as Emperor of China without a crown? And BRI, he wants to connect 100 countries and is ready to spend $1 trillion. Now, nobody in human history has ever tried to do this, be it Alexander the Great or Ottoman Empire or the British Empire. Now, does he hope that by realizing the Chinese dream by 2049, he is aspiring to become the emperor of the world? And does he face any challenge, either from Li Keqiang or any other people, because of you know, the stuttering initially, you know, while dealing with COVID? But the fact remains today, China is 30. It ranks 30 at the bottom somewhere, you know, because the Americans are on top, come Russians come next, and then India. So, has Xi Jinping's image taken any beating in China with people at large? Is there any challenge to his supremacy, because he declared himself as president for life? And will he be able to realize his dream of materializing China dream and, you know, emerging as a new Chinese empire in the 21st century? What do you think?
Thank you very much. It is still not clear because of the opaqueness in the Chinese system, but Xi Jinping was called as chairman for everything because of the 13 posts that he has now occupying. There is also the Mao Zedong's centralization of power that Xi Jinping has imbibed in various ways. In the current Politburo Standing Committee, out of 7 members, 5 members belong to his faction. So which suggests there is absolute majority for him in the Politburo Standing Committee, which is the most decisive body. But there are also criticisms, especially Ren Zhiqiang, who is close to Vice President Wang Qishan. He wrote an article about the emperor's clothes, the new clothes that he's trying to wear. And so he was put in jail and he is now not seen. There is also the criticism from Xu Changrun of the Tsinghua University, who was divested of his post, and by others. I think the litmus test will be in Peitai He, swimming every year during summer, and this is summertime for them, somewhere till August, summertime for them. in Peitai He, they go for swimming. The top leaders go for swimming, and they actually formulate who will be the next leader. That has been avoided during the 19-party Congress in 2017, but the pressure is on. So we may possibly see some pressure mounting in terms of the next generation of leaders. And the speculation has already begun. Hu Chunhua, who is in his 50s, is considered to be the sixth generation leader, who's currently now the vice premier and in charge of agriculture and production. And he was very active in online conferences, in restoring production. First is the piggery, because pork is a precious commodity in China. Because of the foot and mouth disease, the pork production has been affected last year. The pork prices have increased substantially. So Hu Chunhua is also in charge of the pork production restoration. And he is becoming very popular. And so the speculation about his replacement with Hu Chunhua. Having said that, it is still opaque. We do not know what's happening. The 20th Party Congress is due in 1.5 years' time. And next year, April, we will see more intense political jockeying. So I guess this is where the situation will become tough. In China, the president post is titular position. The general secretary and most importantly, the chairman of the Central Military Commission are the most powerful. For instance, Yang Shangkun, Li Xianyan were presidents, but they were not powerful. But also Zhao Jiang, who participated in the 1989 Tiananmen Square, he was general secretary, but he was also not very powerful. The CMC chairman, Central Military Commission chairman, is the most important position. I think so far, no successor for this position has been made. And so the speculation whether Xi Jinping will come out of the influence or not. It is still a black box in China. So it is anyone's guess.
Well, thank you very much. It's 2 hours and 47 minutes. This is some kind of a record. We had nearly 140 odd meetings, either in the hall or as webinars. Even when Miss World and 12 other beautiful women from all over the world came, that meeting did not last this long. We want to thank you and your team of China experts who have put this book together, and we want to thank you for sharing your views on China and COVID and China and India and things like that. We are delighted. We would love to have you over for a drink at the FCC when we reopen. And we want to thank everybody who is watching us on Facebook Live and FCC website and here on Zoom for showing so much interest in China and COVID and primarily, and also relations between India and China. And it has been a wonderful nearly 3 hours interacting with you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so very much. And